thanks so much for clicking. It's Luxe owner Abbie here with you for another video. This look is completely skin focused, which I've been asked for a lot. So if you're interested to find out how I make this super full coverage, really contoured and highlighted skin look, then keep watching. I'm starting with the Mario Badescu Cleansing Seaweed Tonic, which is antibacterial and really calming and soothing for the skin to prep with. I'm using a few extra products today just to show you how I really take my time over skin prep and how that makes a difference to the overall skin look when we are doing a skin focus. I'm just putting on the Embryolisse Lay Cream Concentrate. This is an absolute must for us. So a few dots all over the skin and just massage that in. This product is multifunctional, which we absolutely love. Works amazingly as a moisturiser and primer, and it can also be used as a mask. I'm then also going to be using a treatment on my T-zone. This is the MAC Refined Zone treatment. That's going to go on my T-zone, just a few little dots, and that helps oilier areas which have uneven texture and larger pores, just to help minimise those down. So that's just going on in those areas. Skin prep is a really important part to make sure that your makeup does look flawless, and it's not just the one time that you're using it underneath your makeup. It does need to be used every day to make a dramatic difference to your skin. For that reason, I would really recommend you finding a skincare routine that works for you and being consistent with that. I'm now putting on an eye cream. This is the MAC Fast Response Eye Cream, and I'm making sure that that is on the orbital bone. So you'll be able to feel that. The bone that's around the eyes, don't take that too far close to the underneath of your eye. That will absorb to where it needs to go if you just put that onto the bone and tap that in. The MAC Fast Response Eye Cream works specifically well to help reduce darkness and puffiness, and it works really well underneath your makeup to help smooth as well. So even though this isn't a primer and it is a long-term treatment, you will still get the hydration and smoothing effects from that to help with the overall look of your makeup. I will of course make sure that I link all these products for you down below in the description box, so if there's anything that you like the look of, please check out the link box down below and you will find them there. I'm now moving on to eyebrows. As usual, I'm using my MAC Spiked Brow Pencil. I'm plotting in the underneath structure line first, and then really gradually in light strokes filling in sparser areas. You'll find that I use a lot less pressure towards the front of the eyebrow just to make that a little bit more faded, slightly more ombre, and then more pressure towards the tail. That's normally where we need a little bit more work anyway, a little bit more filling in and more pressure to make that slightly darker. I'm then moving on to my P. Louise Eyeshadow Base. This is in the shade 03 Rumour with a P. Louise flat base brush as well. I'm really slowly just carving underneath the eyebrow, making sure that it's a really sharp line, and filling that concealer or eyeshadow base on all over the eyelid. I won't be putting any eyeshadow on today because this is a skin focused look, but this shows you how easy it is to sharpen up your eyebrow and make it look much neater by putting this base on. Although if you are wearing eyeshadow, this base is an absolute must. It grabs onto the eyeshadow colour, makes it last all day, and makes the colours much more vibrant as well. You do have to pat it in the way that I'm showing here to make sure that it is matted down slightly before you start putting eyeshadow on top. But like I said, we're not doing that today. We are just using it for the coverage on the eyelid to make it more uniform colour, cover any discolorations and sharpen up the eyebrow. Because this base is so thick and full coverage, you need to make sure that you are going over the edges as you just saw with that brush, just to blend those in. Otherwise that will still be visible underneath your foundation when you come to that stage. So blending away those edges in the centre and on the edge just there too. I'm now switching to our absolute holy grail favourite concealer. This is the EX1 Cosmetics Delete Fluid Concealer in the shade 2. I'm using a small brush and just popping small dots of that on any areas where I have a bit more discoloration or blemishes, and letting that sit for a little while. If you're looking for a non-creasing full coverage concealer, then this is definitely the one for you, so check that one out. Now for a little bit of liquid illumination. This is the Topshop Liquid Illuminator in the shade Phoenix, I believe. I'm taking a MAC Duo Fiber brush and just putting that onto the high points of my face. That will give us a little bit of glow underneath the foundation. We will of course be putting on powder highlight on top, but that just helps it to shine through that little bit better. This is a really nice idea as well. If you want a lighter summery glow, you can mix a little bit of this in with your foundation and pop it all over the skin, and it will give you more of a lightweight glowy look, perfect for summer. You can also use this on top of foundation once all your makeup's on, but I just prefer to put it on before. It saves with the liquid mixing with any powders and turning funny. Then using my MAC Tinted Brow Gel, just going over the eyebrow hairs. It just helps them to look a bit more realistic and a little bit more hairy instead of kind of flattened down, if that makes any sense at all. It's slightly more fluffy. I do sometimes repeat this step at the end as well. Sometimes you'll find that you'll get a little bit of concealer throughout this process or powder kind of caught in the hairs, and it turns them a little bit lighter. So sometimes I will repeat this at the end just to redarken some of the hairs that's fallen down onto. And then taking a concealer buffing brush and buffing in those dots that I made earlier. That's just going to give us a slight bit more coverage on those areas that I had blemishes or discoloration around the nose. We of course are going to be putting concealer on later. This just helps on those areas that needed that little bit more to even out the skin tone before we start. This isn't a necessary step unless you've got some major discolorations, but it is just one of those extra little steps that I might do if I am doing a full skin focus and want it to be perfect. Now moving on to my favourite foundation. This is MAC Studio Fix Fluid. I'm using the shade NC25. This is perfect if you like something that's really long wearing. It's a semi-matte finish and it's photo friendly as well, so you can't lose on that one. It's an all-round winner and I feel like it works really well on all skin types too. Now this might seem like a lot that I'm putting on my skin, but please just remember this is personal preference. This is how I like my makeup. You don't have to do this as well. I'm just showing you how I get a really full, flawless, contoured and highlighted finish. That's exactly what this video is. So you can adapt this to your own preference. You don't have to use this much, but I think it's interesting for you to see just how much I do use to create this sort of look. So I'm now using my Luxe blender to blend that in, making sure you go on the ears and behind the ears. Obviously I've got my hair up, so from anyone else's point of view, if I've not gone behind my ears, they're going to see me from different angles and see that I have unevenness or redness or discoloration where it's different to my face colour, where it's all perfectly foundationed. So just make sure that you remember to go on your ears and around behind your ears. Otherwise, that redness, especially in photos, will really stand out on your ears. So making sure that I'm really patting that into the skin all over, taking a little bit of time around the eyebrows so you don't get foundation on them, and then taking a bit of time around the hairline as well to make sure that's blended into the hairline. Now that I've patted that foundation all over so it actually covers the skin, I'm really pressing and rolling the blender with quite a bit of pressure to build coverage. This blender is damp before we use it. That reason is so the blender doesn't absorb any of the foundation into it. So when you're pressing and rolling in this motion, the extra foundation that is on the blender is going into your skin. It's not being absorbed into the blender. I'm showing you the best way to hold it as well to make sure your nails don't pierce the blender, and rolling it on the pointed edge. I don't particularly use the flat edge for foundation. I don't feel like it works as well, so this is the way that I recommend. Then taking some time to go around with a small brush as you just saw to make sure that all areas are blended and perfect. So smaller areas around the eyes and around the nose just to make sure that you've really got in there. This is my go-to cream contour at the moment. I have the Anastasia Beverly Hills ones, but this one I just prefer at the moment. This is the Revolution foundation stick in the shade F13, and as you can see, I'm just placing that around the hairline, underneath the cheekbones. I really like doing this technique as well, where it drags the eyes out slightly by giving a little bit of shading on the temples by the side of the eyes. A little bit under the lip. You'll see at the end how much different my lips look by using contours to make them look bigger. I've then just popped it down the side of my nose as well, and then on a small brush bringing that into the inner part of my eyes, connecting to my nose too, just to help shade that area and make it look really contoured. Like I said before, this video has been so highly requested from people that have never contoured in their life or are scared to do so. So just follow these steps and you really can't go wrong. As long as you've got enough time to really blend out each step, then you can't go wrong. And remember as well, this is for more of a dramatic effect. If you did want this to be really natural, then you'd use a lighter shade of contour, or you wouldn't use as much as me, or you could even just do this with powder. Most of the time, I don't do a full contour like this because it is quite heavy and dramatic. You can just use a bronzing powder and make sure that you're bronzing these areas. Make sure when you go underneath your jawline as well, you don't put too much, otherwise it can make a big difference between matching your chest. I'm then using another P. Louise eyeshadow base. This is a dark shade, number 8. These come in handy for so many different things. You could contour your whole face with this shade. It would be perfect. It's such full coverage as well, and it just has a really good colour payoff. So I do use this one for contouring the eyes without using actual eyeshadow quite often, actually. So this is the shade 08, and it's, as you can see, very similar to the contour shade that I used. So at this stage you'll be thinking, oh my god, that looks crazy, but as I always say, trust the process and go with it. I'm now using a MAC Duo Fiber eyeshadow brush, and this is what I always use for my concealer. Absolutely love this brush. I've got about 4 of them. Again, we're going back to the EX1 Cosmetics concealer in the Delete fluid and just plotting out the areas that we want to be brighter and lighter. This is the shade 2 again, so I've gone quite a bit lighter than my foundation shade, and all the areas down the centre of the face that we want to be brighter, I am putting concealer on. So that being on the forehead, down the nose, a big triangle underneath the eyes, and I'm extending that out to the edge as well, just to intensify that contour coming upwards. I'll put a little bit underneath the cheekbone contour as well, and that will help to brighten up these areas. You've got to take into consideration that this contour is going to darken certain areas quite a bit, so we need to contrast against that too with a lighter colour as well. Now switching back to my Luxe blender, and it's time to get all of that blended in. So with this bit, you need to make sure that you're using a different area of the blender for the lighter or darker shades to make sure that you don't get too much in a mess with things. Or I would recommend having another blender for each of the areas too. For instance, if you've just blended out this cheek contour here, I don't want to be using the same part of that blender to then blend in the under eyes, because that's going to mix with that light colour underneath my eyes and make it dark. So make sure you're using one area for the contour and trying to get most of that blended away first, and then switching to another area, a clean area of the blender, to blend away the concealer, just to keep that nice and bright, or vice versa. You can do it the opposite way, it really doesn't matter. And again, as I said before, if you didn't want this to be so dramatic, then you wouldn't use such a light concealer or such a dark contour. The fact that I've got such a massive difference between the shades of those two means that I am going to get more of a dramatic and defined finish. If that's not for you, then just use shades that are closer in colour to each other, so you'll get a softer finish. Also, if you don't like so much coverage and you don't want to be putting a full face of foundation on, then concealer on top, then contour and more concealer, then you don't have to. You can fully just use your contour and concealer if you wanted to, because they do have coverage in them as well. Obviously, the contour stick that I use is a foundation in itself. So if you didn't want it to be so heavy as I've done here, then you can just use your contour and concealer. So basically skipping right to this step here that I've done without putting your foundation on underneath. I just felt like I needed my skin evening out quite a lot before I even started with this step. But a lot of people will be able to get away with just this because it is giving you coverage, a lot of coverage actually on its own. I just think this is absolutely insane how it can change your face so much. And don't get me wrong, this particular contour and highlight pattern isn't going to be perfect for everyone, but I'm just showing you the general gist of things, what works for me. But there are different styles to take into consideration for different eye shapes and face shapes, and what you want to achieve and how you want your kind of bone structure and face to look, really, which areas you want slim in, which areas you want to look bigger. But I can go into that further if you want me to in another video. Switching back to my Duo Fiber MAC eyeshadow brush, just making sure that those areas are blended that the blender can't get into, so around the eyes and nose again, so we don't have any patches or blobs that are unblended. I'm just using that small brush to go around the eyebrows too. Don't try and get too close with your blender sponge because you will ruin the work that you did earlier on your eyebrows. So it's really good just to take a step back and look at everything as a whole and take the extra time to go back in with that small brush to perfect any areas. The best way to make this really long lasting is to set any areas that have been used with a cream product, and that's going to just intensify the colour that little bit more as well. I'm using MAC Mineralized Skin Finish Natural in the shade Dark Tan to go over my contour. As you can see, I'm pressing that product onto those areas before I then start blending it away. This is because that contoured area is still going to be sticky from using that cream product on there. If we're moving the brush about too much before putting any product on, that's going to start moving that base that we've worked so hard on. So we set that in place first by patting, and then we can dust away any excess and blend that in. I'm going in with a darker shade now of that P. Louise base onto the outer parts of my eyes, so using a lot less product, but that's just going to add a little bit more contour and depth to the outer part of the eyes without using too many different eyeshadows that's going to drop down onto the skin. And then as before, setting that with the bronzer on top. We've already made that slightly darker with that cream eyeshadow base. So there's no need to go on top with darker colours. This is just acting as a powder to set that in place. And then on a fluffy brush, I'm taking that exact same bronzer powder from MAC and setting that all over the lower part of the eyes so we don't get any creasing at all. In the same way, I'm using the RCMA No Colour Powder on the flat part of the Luxe Blender sponge, and I'm baking that powder on any movable areas that tend to be down the T-zone normally. So these movable areas are normally the areas that we've put concealer on. So that's underneath the eyes, onto the forehead, a little bit down the nose just to set that as well. Underneath, I'm just putting this underneath now to sharpen up that contour so it doesn't look messy or there's no contoured bits that have gone too low down. So we're just sharpening that up and bringing it a little bit higher to look neater. I wouldn't recommend baking so heavy underneath the eyes if you have drier under eyes. I would just loosely set with a fluffy brush. That can be with a loose powder or with a bit of pressed powder, just to make sure that the concealer underneath the eyes isn't going to crease and it is going to be long lasting throughout the day, but without packing on so much product as I have done here, because it may look worse. Another tip for putting on powder on the under eyes is look up really high when you're placing that on, because that will stretch that area. If it's creased already and you're putting powder on top, that's just going to make it look so much worse and the creases are going to be so much more prominent. So make sure you're stretching that area before you place the powder. I've then just dusted away most of that powder and left the underneath sharpen powder on, and then blusher onto the apples of the cheeks and blend it upwards. I do like quite a bit of blusher. I think that it brings so much life to the face, especially when we've just put a load of contour on. I think you need a little bit more colour and a bit more dimension there. So putting on the blusher, this is a Morphe or Morphe one, and then that powder has had a little bit more time to bake. So now dusting that away, and you can see how much that sharpens up and neatens that underneath contour. Now switching to my absolute favourite highlighter, this is the Dole Beauty Shine Bright highlighter. I'm using this on a larger fluffy brush to get that in the general area that I want it, on top of the cheekbones, and then I place it onto the forehead just above the eyebrow. And I use a little bit down the nose, a bit on the cupid's bow, and a tiny dot on the chin. This MAC brush is really good because it diffuses the product really nicely. If you can see the direction that I'm putting this on as, I'm not going up and down, so I'm not going from my ear to my mouth, I'm going in zigzags, and that's going to diffuse it so you don't get one single stripe and a line when it hits the light. And it's not always easy for you to see that yourself, so you do need to get the angles to see where that's shining, because it might look from someone else's point of view that you do have that stripe. So go upwards and downwards in the way that I did, and it blends it better. I'm then switching to a smaller brush. So that bigger brush diffused it, and then we want to add a little bit more really specifically in a smaller place to make sure that shines really bright. And I can use that smaller brush to go into the inner corner of the eyes and underneath the eyebrow too. It's really important to then go back to your blusher brush and blend over the edges. Like I said before, we don't want to look like we've got stripes of highlighter, so that's an important part. Then with that same blusher, I'm taking a little bit of that onto the forehead and temples and a little bit on the end of the nose. I think it just adds a little bit to make you look a bit healthier and bring a bit of colour. Lashes are on, now it's time for lips. I'm using just 3 lip pencils for this look to create a really contoured and fuller looking lip. The first shade I used just underneath that lower part there was MAC lip pencil in Cork. That's a really deep brown. That's going to go in the area that I put that contour just to really deepen and give a fuller look on that bottom lip. The second colour then I used around the whole outside of the lip was MAC Strip Down lip pencil, and then to fill in the whole inner part of the lip I'm using a lighter brown which was MAC Oak, and then on top I'm using a Jordana T-shirt lip gloss just on top of those lip pencils to give a bit of shine. This is a nude glittery gloss in the colour Enchanted. And then this is my little tip: squeeze your lashes together, make sure they feel comfortable, and then really lift them up and back on themselves. It will make them feel so much more comfortable, and join them with your own lashes too. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I really hope you learned a lot from this, and I will see you next time.